We're here in the Maimer of Basi Legani, Tafshin Chav Beis. We're at the end of Sifei. We're starting Sivav. Just to summarize again the theme of the whole Inyan of Oyer Ein Sof Lamata Din Tachlis, what the Chiddush here in the Maimer is. So the point that Rabbi is explaining is that Oyer is Me'ein HaMoyer. Right? Because Oyer is Me'ein HaMoyer, so whatever you have in the Moyer is reflected in the Oyer as well. If you have the Inyan of Ein Sof in the Moyer, in the source, so Oyer has the Inyan of Ein Sof as well. The Gilui of the Oyer is an Oifen of Ein Sof. You have the Inyan of Ein Lo Tchila by the Eibishter himself, and therefore he has the Koyach to create Yesh Ma'ayin. So that Koyach is in the Oyer as well, that it could create Nevrayim. This Havas of Yesh Ma'ayin comes from the Oyer. What's the reason for this? Why does Oyer have the Koyach of the Moyer? Because the Oyer is not a Metzias for itself, B'chlal. When we use the terminology Oyer, this is really a unique description for the Oifen HaShpa that there is L'mayla. Below, this Lashon of Oyer does not properly describe the way a Hashpa comes from one source to another. What would describe the Hashpa in this world? Shefa, the word Shefa. The word Oyer is the description that the Mekubalim decided to use for the Hashpa that comes by the Eibishter. Why? Because the concept of Oyer is that the source is unchanged. The Oyer, the source, the Ma'ir, does not move in any way. There's no Hisaskos, and the Oyer is there automatically. What's the reason for this taka? Usually every hashpa there has to be some movement, some change in the source, in the hashpa that comes down. So the pshat that Chassidus always says in this is because by the Eibishter, his Oifen HaMetzias is not the same in the Oifen HaMetzias the way it exists in this world. In this world, so there's a person that's murkev. A person is comprised of different parts to the way he exists. There's the way he is to himself, the way he comes down. There's his gilui. There's the way he is to himself, and those are different parts of the person, different inyanim. Mashenkin l'mayla. The fact that the Eibishter is nizgala, the fact that there's a gilui l'mayla. What does that mean? That there's a certain aspect of the Eibishter kaviyachol which is gilui. That's not accurate. That's incorrect to say that. You can't say that l'mayla there's a chelik of the Eibishter kaviyachol that's above gilui, and then there's a chelik that's shayach to gilui. Those terminologies are not true because l'mayla the Eibishter is not shayach b'chlal to say that he shtal sechais, that he exists in one oifen, he exists in another oifen. There is none of that. Why is it shayach by the Eibishter l'mayla the Inyan of gilui? Because the Eibishter is be'etzem, exists be'etzem in whatever oifen he wants to exist. The Eibishter is, his Metzias is be'etzem. He is in every oifen. He's in an oifen of anah begilui, he's oifen of he is begilui, he's behelem, he's l'mayla, he's l'mata. Because the Eibishter is less asar panim minei. He is everything. He is everywhere. So therefore, gilui is not a yerida. Gilui is not the pshat that there's a state that's higher than gilui. There's a state that's lower than gilui. There's no such a thing. By the Eibishter l'mayla, he exists be'etzem. If he exists be'etzem, so when there's a gilui from the Eibishter, what's that gilui? That gilui is the Eibishter himself. The Eibishter himself is here, is present, is felt in his gilui. That's what it is. It's not something else by a person, by a normal person, by a Rav, a Talmud, any other kind of ashpa that exists in the world. So there's matzavim. The whole existence of the person in the first place is a certain kind of condition that he was created in. So he's defined. He's a defined existence. So that defined existence is on one level. And then there's a hashpa to a makabel, which is on a different level, and he has a defined existence on his level. And then there has to be a transition, or you have to bring down a hashpa from here to here, from this level to that level. So there's higher than gilui, then you come down to gilui. Yeah, there's a yerida. By the Eibishter, he's not defined to any level. It's not the pshat that the Eibishter comes down to gilui. There's such a thing. The Eibishter doesn't come down to gilui because he is be'etzem. So there's a gilui also. So the gilui is memela. What does memela mean? Memela means it's mitzad who he is, mitzad his shleimus, because he could be begilui as well. It's not a unique thing that the Eibishter decides to come out to be nizgala. That's the Nakud of this Inyan. So therefore, Oyer, the emesis, this musig of Oyer, is unique, and unique concept which explains the Oifen HaShpa the way it is l'mayla. It doesn't. The Inyan of Oyer does not exist in the other than the Eibishter. Elamai, the Eibishter put it into the Teva Bria as well, that you have to some extent this Inyan of Oyer that you find in the world by Oyer that we have Oyer HaShemesh. That the oil that comes from the shemesh is also bedaimet to this type of hashpa. The sun remains to itself. The sun does not move out of its position. It doesn't change It doesn't have to be yoyed. It doesn't have to be misasik in the hashpah that comes out. And still, the Oyer HaShemesh comes out with derech mamela. The Eibush should put into the teva of the world that there's a similar kind of hashpah in Oyer HaShemesh. But naturally, mitzad the teva of what the mitzias of the world is, there's no such a musig of hashpah b'derech Oyer. There's no such a thing that a person is going to say that he remains to himself, and b'derech mamela there's a yirida to another mitzias. There's the person in the matzav where he's higher, and there's the person that is a matzav and he's lower. It's not the same matzav; it's a different matzav. By the Eibush L'mayla, there's no matzavim. You can't say the Eibush is in one matzav, another matzav. It doesn't exist b'chlal. That's why the Oyer that comes out is the Eibush himself. When you say Oyer mein amoyer, the nukuda is you don't have a mitzias of Oyer, and now this mitzias of Oyer has in it a maila that it's going to be like the Oyer. It's not true. The whole kavanah of Oyer mein amoyer is that the Oyer is a reflection of the Oyer himself. It is the Oyer in this tenuah of Gilui. It's the Eibishter that's here. He's coming out. You hear what I'm saying?
I do. The only thing confusing at the end, you said, but again, everything Gilui is baratzon. He doesn't have to decide to be revealed.
No, so that's already another vart. That's already another vart, which is bavar and chesedus. That obviously, even though we say always that the Oyer is b'derech memela, but nevertheless, l'mayla by the Eibishter, there's no such a thing b'derech memela. The Eibishter decided it was all baratzon. The Gilui Oyer l'mayla was baratzon. By the Oyer HaShemesh, the Oyer is not beratzon. It comes out memela. But l'mayla, the Oyer is not memela. The Oyer is beratzon. Yeah, that's a distinction, correct. And the emphasis that doesn't show in a certain chesaron of the Eibush l'mayla. Adarab, it shows on a maila the fact that it's beratzon, and it actually shows a maila benegate to this very inyan itself of that the Eibush is not mugbal in any way. The word is not only that he's not mugbal, but he's not defined by anything. By Oyer HaShemesh, this is taka chiluk between the Oyer HaShemesh and the inyan of Oyer, the way it is l'mayla. In this sense, the mashal is not daimet to the nimshal. Like I said, the emissaries, the inyan of Oyer only exists l'mayla by the Eibishter. The Eibishter then put the same teva into the Oyer HaShemesh, the same kind of eifan hashpah. But over here it's not daimah. Why? Because by the Oyer HaShemesh, l'chatchila, the Oyer, the Shemesh, is created in such a oifen that it has brightness that has to come out of it. It doesn't have a choice. So what does that mean? The fact that it has to come out means that sof, the sun is a defined existence. It has behirus, has tremendous amount of light in it, and whether it likes it or not, it's not dependent on the mitzias of the Shemesh. It's already been pre-designed that the Oyer HaShemesh comes out of it. So in that sense, the Oyer HaShemesh is not a mashal mechuven. It's not an emes mashal for the Eibishter. The whole point of Oyer mein amoyer is to explain that the Eibishter himself is an undefined existence, and therefore when you talk about a hashpah that comes from him, it's not that there's an entity of a hashpah. It's all him. It's all the Eibishter himself. It's what he decided. It's because he's not defined, so therefore he has hashpah as well. He decided to be in the seifin of hashpah. Kumtais. That Adarabah, where do you have this musig that the Eibishter himself is completely undefined, only by the Eibishter, where the Oyer comes beratzon? What does it mean that it comes beratzon? It means he's not pre-programmed in any way. That there is nothing that it has to be like this, it has to be like that. Even this gufa, that the inyan of a gilui is also not something. It doesn't have to even be b'chlal the inyan of gilui. The Shemesh, there has to be Gilui. You can't have a bright Metzias of a Shemesh without a Gilui. Impossible. L'mayla by the Eibishter, nothing has to be. So what happens when there is a Gilui? The Eibishter decided there should be a Gilui. So then what's that Gilui? It's the Eibishter. It's all the Eibishter. There's no natures in this. There's no pre-programs in this. It's purely just the Eibishter coming out in this. That's our main Amar.
It's like the Ma'or exists only because it has Or. If there's no Or, there's no Ma'or. In
a way, I mean that is what the Moyer is. The Moyer is a massive source of light that exists within it and has to also exist by Fishel Gili that comes out of it.
Otherwise, it's not a Mar.
Okay, exactly. Mashenkel Lamaila. When we use the term Lamaila for the Eibishter Moyer, so it always says that Moyer is not the emes term to speak about the Eibishter himself. The Eibishter is not a Moyer. The Eibishter Atzmos. It's not described. He's not even described as a Moyer either. Right. Elamai, when we talk about the Eibishter being the source of the light, of the Giluyim that come out, so we refer to that source as Mo'ir, as the source of the light. But that's not, the Eibishter himself is not defined already that he's a Metzias of a source of a Mo'ir. That's the musik of Oyer Men Amor. So therefore, on one hand, so the mime over here, the paragraph I learned yesterday, I read through it very quickly. On one hand, the Oyer that comes out is Ha'ara Balma. It's not that there's nothing here. There's no entity, B'chlal. There's no separate entity. You can't say that you have a percent of the Eibishter that's here in the Oyer. You have some Metzias Davar, a Mohus of something. The Oyer is not a Metzias B'chlal for itself. So what is the Oyer? The Oyer is the Etzem. It's the Eibishter himself. The Eibishter himself is coming out. He's in a Tnuah of Gilui. He's in the Eibishter is to himself, and the Eibishter decided there should be a Gilui, so the Eibishter is in a Tnuah of Gilui. Not that there's a certain Metzias, a certain percent. When you have a human being that's mashpia, so he himself is comprised of different matzavim. He could be to himself, he could be lower down to others. So when there's ashpa that comes out, what is that ashpa? It's a certain percent of the person. This is a certain part of his personality, it's a certain part of his seichel, it's a certain part of his emotions, it's a certain chelik of who the person is. By the Eibishter, you can't divide it in this inyan. There's chalokim, there's different matzavim by the Eibishter, and when you get up to a certain matzav, a certain percent, a certain part of the Eibishter that comes out. No, the Oyer is b'chlal garnished. It's not a metzias for itself. What is the Oyer? It's the Eibishter himself. It's the Eibishter himself that's in a tnuah of Gilui. So therefore, this Oyer is mein amoyer, and it has in it the koyach of bligvul. This koyach of bligvul, because it's that's exactly what Oyer is. Oyer is the fact that the Eibishter is not defined, and therefore he's nizgala. So when you have that Gilui has in it this inyan of bligvul, that there's only by the Eibishter himself.
All this Oyer and Shefa and all these stuff is only inside us that's getting it. But Eibishter is the Eibishter.
The Eibishter himself is not muchrich in any of this.
Right, it's not
shaykh to any of this. Look,
you're talking about how, from our perspective, of the
okay.
The Eibishter is doesn't.
It's not shaykh to any of this. I mean, look,
all talking about how.
Correct, but the reason why Chassidus talks about this union of Oyer. Well, what's the significance of this? I mean, this you could say this. I don't know if to divide it in this way, but the significance of this whole point is that there's three different things here. Number one, this gives us a little bit of an understanding, whatever, an understanding. It gives us that the Oifen HaMetzias of how the Eibishter exists is different than the way we exist. The whole definition of Metzias by any existence is a certain matzev. It's a certain something caused it to come into existence in a certain defined oifen, and he exists like that. The oifen hametzias l'mayla is a different oifen hametzias. The Eibishter exists be'etzem. That's the first point. That's a very important point that Chassidus speaks about based on the lashon of the Rambam, that the Eibishter is a built-in metzias nimsa. It's a different type of metzias. That's one important point. Another important point is there's an interaction of the Eibishter with Welt. How do we explain this interaction of the Eibishter and the Welt? We have a metzias of a world which is gvul, which is very, very low, and Chassidus is trying to prove to you and show to you that the Oyer Ein Sof is here, lamata, it's here, you could see it in all the levels. You could see this gili of bli gvul. You would say, what do you mean? How could you see bli gvul in any levels? The Eibishter himself is bli gvul. The moment you come down outside, so to speak, of the Eibishter himself, that's it. So there is no applicable, there is no expression of who the Eibishter himself is.
The point is, there is no outside.
Oh, and chanami. Right, but you would think, if the Eibishter himself is such a type of metzias, that's b'chlal not mesiachas to our metzias. So there's no, you can't even start discussing how could a world exist if the Eibishter is bli gvul. So how does gvul exist if there's bli gvul? Let's ask such a kind of question. If you have an unlimited existence over here, so where does gvul come into play? There's no gvul in the presence of bli gvul. Legabe the Eibishter himself, that's not a question, b'chlal. Why? Because legabe the Eibishter himself, you can ask a question, how could this table exist over here if right over here there's a dvar seichel of 2 + 2 = 4, so the 2 + 2 = 4 takes up space, doesn't it? So how could the table exist in the same place where I already have another metzias of 2 + 2 = 4? It's the shtos, right? Obviously, why? Because the fact that there's a dvar seichel that exists does not exist in an oifen that it takes up space. It's not a tangible metzias. So there's no stira to say that in this room there's a metzias and a truth of 2 + 2 = 4, and at the same time there's a metzias of a shulchan here. So that's when you're talking about two Metziasen that are mugbal. Even a Dvar Seichel is a Metzias that the Eibishter created. The klal of 2 + 2 = 4 is a Metzias that the Eibishter created, as much as the physical table is a Metzias that the Eibishter created. Elamai, one is created as a Ruchni Metzias, one is created as a Gashmi Metzias. And there's no discussion of whether one contradicts the other. There's no shaykhs to each other. How much more so when you get to the essence of the Eibishter himself, which is built in Metzias Nimtza, the oifen of how he exists is undefined legamri, and then you're talking about in the world where there's defined Metzias. Now you can ask a question: the defined Metzias that exists, is that in any way a contradiction to the Eibishter's existence? There's no shaykhs b'chlal. These are two completely different types of ifanav Metzias. They don't cross paths b'chlal. So the question is, so this creation, as if there's no shaykhs to Elokus. When we talk about making a dir b'tachtainim, we're going to make a dwelling for the Eibishter, we're going to be Megala Elokus over here in this world. Where it's not, the Eibishter is here always, on one hand, unless asab panim minei, and on the other hand, it's not shaykh to this world. It's not shaykh to this suga metzias b'chlal. So what is this concept of making a dir b'tachtainim? That's a huge question. So Chassidus comes to explain, no. Anachanami, the Eibishter is in a metzias, built in metzias nimsa, he's not shaykh to our metzias, but then there's the union of oyer. Oyer is that link that connects the two, for the lack of a better word. I mean, oyer is where you have a gilui that comes out from the Eibishter. A gilui means, what does gilui mean? Gilui means that befedish is the Eibishter being expressed and experienced and felt in a metzias, not the Eibishter's metzias. The concept of gilui is that it comes out, that it is being experienced in a metzias that feels, there's an intensity of bleak gvul. And over here, gvul is a stira. Here's where the famous Eitz Chaim comes in, where the Arizal says, it's a big shaila, how could it be a creation if Eirin Seif was memala makam macholol, if the Eibishter fills up the whole empty space, so how could you have a metzias of gvul? The Eitz Chaim is not asking, so Chassidus always says, the Eitz Chaim is not asking that question mitzad atzmos. So the Eibishter himself, there's no such a question. The lashon that's always brought from Torah Eir is that the Eibishter himself is everywhere. The Eibishter himself, less asar panimine, there was never a tzimtzum, there's never a shaila how the world could exist if the Eibishter is everywhere. That's not a discussion. B'chlal. The Eitz Chaim is asking, mitzad the union of Eir is already a gilui. It's a metzias that comes out. It's the Eibishter, the way he's experienced in the world of metzias. Over here, there's a shaila. If you have bleak gvul, so how could you have gvul? So the whole union of Oyer is to come and explain how the Eibishter comes out from being a different type of metzias into our metzias. So that's why Oyer is a very important union. Second point. The third point is v'nigeh taniya v'aylo shenisi. I'm going too fast?
No, I was just going to say, just the last point, he changes from this to something. So what about Lo Shenisi, man?
Oh.
Okay. Interrupt for a question, for a statement.
Yeah, okay.
We make the shir in memory of Yosef ben Shimon Halevi. It's the outsiders today, please.
Shomash Avin Aliyah.
Amen.
So, okay, look, all these in Yonim are in Chassidus pages and pages. I'm just trying to summarize, just in a kodah, just a little bit of a taste, if we take a break and learn now the whole Samach Vav, and then we'll come back, So we'll do that for 10 years, and then we'll come back to finishing the Maimer. We can stop right here, go to Samach Vav, then come back, and then we'll pun him. So in Samach Vav there, he says that the Mekubalim spoke about this whole union of Oyer because of Aniyah Vayaloshen Nisi. Big question is, it says Aniyah Vayaloshen Nisi. The Eibishter is not changed by creation. How could that be? There's a klal. Anytime there's a pu'ula being done, there has to be a change. Not only in the fact that you created a being, or something, but in the pile, the one that's doing it. There has to be a movement. I think I mentioned when we started this whole Inyan, kol maniya misnaneya. If you're moving something, that means that it's not just the item that moved, you moved. And that's why what moved. It's not just physically, but also in ruchnisdige levels. If there's any time there's a hashpah that's coming from one place to another, there has to be some kind of a movement in the source where the hashpah is coming from. You can't just have a hashpah and the mashpia is like unfazed, doesn't get involved in this hashpah. What does that mean? If he's not getting involved in the hashpah, so there's no hashpah. Elamai, so the question is, the Eibishter, who created this world? The Eibishter himself created the world. In certain places in Chassidus, it speaks about, this is Tanya Perik Chafala, for example. So Chafala, the Alter Rebbe talks about the fact, because it says, B'dvara vaya shamayim nasu, so the creation comes from a very low level, comes from the level of Dibur. So therefore, the Eibishter himself is Be'ein areich to his Dibur, Just like we see by a human being, that a person himself is be'ein areich to his dibur. So therefore, if he speaks one word, or he speaks another word, or whatever he says, does it affect the person himself? Does it in any way change the person himself? No, there's no. So therefore, there's no. The Eibishter himself is loishanisi. It's just the dibur that's creating. But then Chassidus comes and tells us, but what's the truth? That's maybe one aspect of the hisabas hayesh, that it comes from dibur. But the etzem hisabas of yesh ma'ayin must come only. It's a kayach that could only come from the Eibishter himself. Only the Eibishter, which is Ein Le'ilah V'Siba, only the Eibishter himself could create Yesh Ma'ayin. And this is something that, even before, this is the Yisai that in the Rabbi Rashab there, in the Maimah says, the Mekabalim knew of this, that it has to come from the Eibishter himself. So therefore, why Aniyah violation Nisi? How could it be? So there was, in the Mekabalim Arishayim actually, the earlier Mekabalim said that no, that Keser has a Kayach of Ein Sof. Keser has a Kayach to create. Not only the essence of the Eibishter himself. Okay, so then you could write this down. That only Keser creates. But the later generation of Mekabalim understood that no, there is no source of Bria that comes from Keser. Only the Eibishter himself that has the Kayach to create. Yesh Ma'ayin. We already learned the Hezbollah of why that is before. If so, how could you say Aniyah Vayla Shanisi? The answer is, the whole premise of the question is wrong. The premise of the question is, any time a pu'ula is done, it's machriach to say that the poil is involved, and he gets changed by this pu'ula. That rule doesn't apply to the Eibishter. By a regular person, which is comprised of parts, and this matzavim, he exists in a certain matzav, so then he's a matzav where he's not being poil, now he is active, and he's being mashpia, and there's all kinds of levels of how he's mashpia, to what extent he's learning, so there's shinuyim in his matzav. Mashenkin by the Eibishter, he exists ba'etzem. So whatever comes out from the Eibishter is just an expression of his shleimus. So what's in this? It's the Eibishter that's in this. It's not a darga and one matzav and another matzav because the Eibishter has no gedder whatsoever, so that's expressed by the fact that he could create. So what's the creation? It's the Eibishter lowering himself down. Adarabah. This is the Eibishter himself. Because he has no gedder, he could create as well. So therefore, the Avaya, because the Eibishter exists in a completely different hyphen. That's B'chlal is the reason why we're speaking about why we speak about this in Avaya.
I mean, it's the klutz culture. The early
Yeah.
that didn't understand this. How come they came up with this idea?
Okay, so look, B'chlalos, I remember hearing from Melech Tzvibel this, and this is, all the mashpim say this. This is a pashta point, and actually a very fundamental point to always remember about these inyanim. Two things. First of all, you have in Chassidus, you have different discussions about Mekubalim. Right? That is, some Mekubalim said like this, some Mekubalim said like that, and sometimes you even have arguments about different things. So 2 points. First of all, the pshat is that in a certain generation, the Gilui Milmaila did not exist. It's not the pshat that's Mekubalim of an earlier generation, so they were pushed, we weren't so smart. They couldn't figure it out. Lahavdal, Aleph, Alfi, Avdal. You're going to talk about scientists that research different things, and at a certain point there was a breakthrough. I don't know the names of the scientists. I'm not familiar with all these different things.
Where wasn't there exist by...
One second. Okay, one second. Right. Okay, so let me explain the concept. Yeah, in science, kaviyachol, so you have a certain breakthrough. They went to labs and they made certain tests and different things, and they made discoveries in science. And then, based on those discoveries, later generations made different discoveries. And as they weiter and weiter. So it's just a matter of time and seichel and all kinds of different tests they did, or whatever the word is called in English. Masha'en came by the Mekubalim. It's not. That's not what it is. It's not the pshat. There's a certain times. There's Matan Torah, which is one kind of gilui. There's a Beis Hamikdash, which is another gilui, like he's saying. And then there's the gilui of the Rashbi and the Zayah. And there's a gilui of Mekubalim Arishayim. Each generation, because of the giluyim U'Maila that came into the world, so it was understood in a certain level. What does it mean understood in a certain level? Understood means that the gilui in the seichel of people, of the seichel of these Mekubalim, they were able to understand it in a certain level. Mitzad the fact that the Eibishter was nimshach to that degree. Then came a hamshacha to a further degree. The Alter Rebbe came to explain this inyan of Oyer Ein Sof. The Alter Rebbe is a chiddush where the Alter Rebbe discussed what's taka this inyan of Oyer Ein Sof and what's this koyach hasavos. It's a gilui. It's a new tkufa. It's a new gilui that happened. That's one point. Another point, the kitzur is beneged to these machlekes and the yab between Mekubalim. Most of the time, if not all the time, the pshat is that each opinion is expressing another prat in the shleimus of the Eibishter. It comes out in this oifen, it comes out in that oifen. Each one of them is pointing out a different shleimus, a different maila, and usually it's mara machad v'loy pligi. They're not arguing, but each one is pointing out a different aspect of the shleimus of the Eibishter and in different oifanim. But it's not a typical thing where you have a halacha and you have machlekes. That's why it says in the Benegay Chassidus, less taman, loy kushiv, loy pirud, and so on. There's no questions really. Okay, we didn't get to learn anything in the Maimer inside today, so.
Ask your son. He'll tell you the answer.
We're in the Maimer Basi Legani Tafshin Chav Beis. We are in Seif Vav, the beginning of Seif Vav. So finally, here the Rebbe is going to bring all these inyanim that we spoke about regarding Ein Sof, Oyer Ein Sof, and apply it to Avodas Hashem. Or actually, the main point that I was going to speak about is that how high, how far does a person reach through his Avodas Hashem? Right? There's this discussion in Chassidus when you get to the Avodah of a person's a metzius, a person's limited. The actions that he does are limited to the limitations he has as far as how high up he can connect to Hashem. So l'chayre, we can't really connect to the very essence of the Eibishter himself. But nevertheless, we must say that the Avodah of a Yid is reaching and connecting to the essence of the Eibishter himself. It's mukhrich to say so. How's it possible? How's it possible that a human being, neshama beguf, has that koyach to relate to the Eibishter himself? So it's mukhrich to say the point that we learned before in the Maimer, that because there's an union of Oyer, and through Oyer you're able to have a reflection and the koyach of the Eibishter himself in the Oyer. So therefore, through Oyer, we're able to connect to the Eibishter himself. That's l'chayre, the nekuda that the Rebbe is going to explain here. Let's see inside. Yesh l'haisef. So now we could add to what we have learned before. Shekol everything we explained there. Mukhrach is also something we must say. It's forced to be explained this way. Gam eklolis inyan avodas adam. When we look in general at the avodah of a person, regarding this point, how far, how high does a person reach with his avodah? It's interesting the lashon that Rabbi uses here. The Rabbi uses the term mukhrach. The Rabbi doesn't just say that we can add and explain this inyan also regarding avodas adam. It's mukhrach, that this whole entire thing that we're speaking about here is all mukhrach from avodas adam. So this is mukhrach. The word mukhrach means we're forced to say so. Or maybe there's a better way how to translate it, but that's basically what it means. Yeah. We're compelled to say. Oh, now I feel good. Baruch Hashem. Yeah. Okay.
Have to do the vocabulary list.
Yeah, Baruch Hashem. Hinei yidu atayris harav hamagid al maimer azal. So it's known the word that the Mezritcher Magid said regarding what the Gemara says. Gedolim maise tzadikim yosem imaise shamayim v'aretz. The actions of tzadikim are greater than the actions of the Eibishter when he created heaven and earth. What's the reason? So when we talk about shamayim v'aretz, this means ki maise bereishis haya yesh ma'ayin. When the Eibishter creates heaven and earth, so this is a creation that's yesh ma'ayin. Hainu ma'ayin liyesh, that out of nothingness came a being. The Eibishter creates yesh ma'ayin. As we learned before in the Maimer, that this is an inyan. The yesh ma'ayin is something that only the essence of the Eibishter himself could do. It's not something that can come from any level. The Eibishter himself. But tzadikim oisim miyesh ayin. And what do tzadikim accomplish? They serve the Eibishter here in this world by taking a physical object, for example, and elevating it to become an object of a mitzvah, and then fulfilling a mitzvah with it. And when you fulfill a mitzvah with this physical object, you transform it from being a yesh to becoming an ayin. So the Eibishter creates a yesh out of an ayin, and we take that yesh and bring it back to the state of ayin. That's the word that the Maggid says on this Gemara. Or actually, this is the inyan that the Gemara speaks about. And the question isn't exactly what the word of the Maggid on this Gemara is. Okay, let's see what the Rebbe asks here. Move on. So the question on this is, how could you say that what tzaddikim do is greater than what the Eibishter does? This that tzaddikim accomplish, that they take a yesh of this world and they elevate it, transform it to become an ayin. So magia rak b'pchinas ayin, so that they can elevate and they can only reach to a level that's called ayin. Shezeu amakim she'elav magas aveidas adam. Ayin is a level that the aveda of a person can reach there. What does ayin refer to? Ayin does not refer to the essence of the Eibishter himself. The term ayin means that this is a level that, in contrast to the gashmis of the world, it's ayin. It's a level that's ruchnius, and therefore it's beyond our havana v'asag. It's beyond our comprehension, and therefore we refer to it as ayin. That's one pshat of ayin. Or even if the pshat of ayin means that not only mitzad our havana v'asag, that in contrast to the suga mitzias, to the oifen of how we exist, this is ayin. This is a level of ayin. It's a level of ruchnius, which is completely different than the being and the existence of this world. But nevertheless, the term ayin does not refer to the Eibishter himself. The term ayin refers to a certain darga of ruchnius. And that's the level that we're able to elevate and transform the gashmis, the things, through the mitzvahs, to this level. That's it, ayin, not higher than ayin. That's the mitzvah, the translation of the word ayin, what ayin means. But then besides that, the Rebbe says that a person with his aveda could only reach to the level of ayin, not higher than ayin. Why? Higher than the level of ayin. Nema, the pasuk says, if you're righteous, what have you given him? If you were the opposite, so then also it doesn't affect the Eibishter. He doesn't get in any way diminished, his greatness. It doesn't, in no way does the Eibishter get moved by anything that the person does, in the positive or the negative. And then there's an expression that it says even stronger than this in the Medrash. The Eibishter himself says that I don't know what I desire. Maseim shel tzadikim, the actions of tzadikim, or the opposite of the actions of tzadikim. So what does this mean? Why does the Eibishter say Eini Yedeya? What do you mean? The Eibishter is Eini Yedeya. The Eibishter wrote in the Torah that he should fulfill the Taryag mitzvahs. How could it say Eini Yedeya? But what this means l'chayre is that all those in Yonim, the meaning of Taryag mitzvahs that we have in the Torah, and the Eibishter says you should do a mitzvah, that's on one level where it matters to him, where there's a tfisis mokim to the mitzias of an ivra. But the Eibishter himself, which is beyond anything, where the entire mitzias doesn't begin b'chlal, there's nothing as typhus makim, so any idea, the Eibishter says you can't say that there's a value to a mitzvah more than anything else. It's the same thing. That's b'pashtus, the taich of the Medrash. Now, obviously, it's very hard to understand what this means. I mean, the Eibishter gave a mitzvah in the Torah. The mitzvah that the Eibishter gives in the Torah is not a mitzvah that comes from a certain level. The Eibishter himself says, "Hanochi avai lekecha," and then he tells us the 613 mitzvahs. The Eibishter himself says this. It's not so mitzvahs comes from a certain level. What does this mean? Eini yedeya be'ezem men chafetz. Okay, so we'll see soon. Maybe the Rebbe will explain this. But first, b'pashtus, what it says in the Medrash and what it says in the Gemara. So the Rebbe is bringing you one Maimer Azal that speaks about the perspective of the people in the world, and another Maimer Azal that speaks about from the Eibishter's perspective. From our perspective, we're limited. We can't reach higher than where a Nivra can attain to go to. We're limited in our kayach. So therefore, where could we reach to? So you see in the Lashon of the Gemara, we can reach to the level of ayin, not above that. And from the Eibishter's perspective, it says in the Medrash, Eini Yedeya. The Eibishter says there's no difference. Eini Yedeya means it's all the same to me. So if so, continuing the question, Ve'eich ef shaloima, how could he say, Shamaise tzadikim, Shemagia rak bebchenes ha'ayin, that the actions of the tzadikim in this world, that only reaches to the level of ayin, Gedolim Yoser, Mimaisa Shemayim, Va'aretz, is greater than the Eibishter creating heaven and earth, which is Yesh Ma'ayin. What's the koyach of the Eibishter creating Yesh Ma'ayin? That's the koyach of the essence of the Eibishter. Shehu me'oir ein soif, sha'oiru ke'ein amoir. As we explained earlier in the Maimer, how does creation Yesh Ma'ayin happen? It comes from the Eibishter through the oir. The expression of oir is the source of creation. Because the oir is ke'en amoir, the oir is a reflection of the moir itself, and therefore, hu muhusiv atzmusa shel ha'maitzel baruch hu. This is the essence of the Eibishter himself. Shemitziyusei hu me'atzmusai. His being is from himself. Ve'ena alu me'ezila shekatan l'chas v'shalom. And he's not caused, he's not brought into being by anything. He exists on his own. He exists mitzad himself, not mitzad anything else. Only the Eibishter himself could create Yesh Ma'ayin. As we learned about this, I'm not going to go through the Hezbollah again. So when it comes to creation of Yesh Ma'ayin, This is the essence of the Eibishter himself. When it comes to the Avodah of the created being in the world, so the created being in the world is limited. So the question is a very, very simple question over here. The Eibishter, the essence, the Eibishter himself is creating Yesh Ma'ayin. A human being, a limited being in this world through his Avodah, has the power to reach any higher than this Kayach of Yesh Ma'ayin. It's impossible. How could you say such a thing? Adarabah, the human being over here below that was already created is very limited by what he can do, by how far he can reach. He can only reach to the level of Ayin.
The ayin has a different meaning. Yesh ayin, that's one. The Abish's ayin is different than what the person can reach to when he's making
The taich of the word ayin, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Different.
Yeah, for sure. Yesh ma'ayin means a yesh that comes from nothingness, from nothingness. There are some places where it explains that yesh me'ayin, also ayin does not refer to the fact that something came into being out of nothingness. The ayin also refers to the darga of ruchnius, a certain darga of ruchnius, which is l'mayla ma'avon v'asaga. That there's, in other words, yesh ma'ayin is another way of expressing an idea that it's be'ein areich. You don't see the relation between the yesh and its source. Every yesh in this world has a source l'mayla, but the distance between the yesh and the source l'mayla is so far that we call it yesh ma'ayin. That's one pshat of yesh ma'ayin. But that's not the pshat of yesh ma'ayin that the Rebbe is talking about here. Here the Rebbe is talking about the pirush of yesh ma'ayin kipshuta. Yesh, a yesh that came into being out of an ayin. And it doesn't see bichlal any makar. Doesn't know, the yesh exists in such a eifin that it doesn't know bichlal that it has a makar. How does such a kind of a yesh come into being? That it doesn't know of a makar. The answer is only the Eibishter himself, which is mitziyusay matzmusay and has no makar, has no ilu v'sibah, could create a yesh that sees no source bichlal. That's the taich of yesh ma'ayin here. It's not the same taich as the lashon that he said before, benigay to the fact that we make a yesh into an ayin. There, it refers to the fact that we take gashmias and we connect it back to its ruchnis the gesor slamayla by fulfilling a mitzvah. Where do we elevate the gashmias the gechayfetz to when we do a mitzvah with it? We elevate it to the source lamayla, not to the essence of the Eibusha. That's not what the term ayin means.
So I was saying that the
Yeah, it's different terms.
Yesh ma'ayin and yesh ma'ayin and from yesh ma'ayin is two different ayins.
Yeah, correct. So the Rebbe explains as follows. Let's see. So the answer is yes, on one hand it's true. This level that a person can reach to higher than any mokim means, a level where there is no, I'm not talking about gashmis de mokim, but a level that's higher than any levels. Mokim lamayla means levels. So when the avodah of a person in this world, how's it viewed from the perspective of the Eibishter, which is lamayla ma mokim, lamayla ma any levels, where no levels are teifis mokim. So then nothing that the person does is considered to be an accomplishment. Nothing is adding there, nothing is subtracting. It's lamayla ma mokim. So when a person's avodah comes to this level of lamayla ma mokim, shesham agas avodas adam, he ba'ofen de chashecha kaira. Over there, the way it's viewed is that chashecha and oira are the same thing. Light and darkness is all the same thing. There's no nafkamina by the Eibishter. There's no maila to light and there's no chesaron to darkness. And the same thing mitigated to the actions of a person. There's no maila to what he did do and there's no chesaron to what he did not do. Right? And the diak of this lashon, ki chashecha, ki oira, it doesn't say that chashecha is ka-oira. It says ki chashecha, ki oira. If you say chashecha ka-oira, what does that mean? That really light has a maila. Light is much greater than darkness. Elamai, nevertheless, chayshech is ke-oira. When you say ke-chashecha ke-oira, what you're saying is there's l'chatchila no maila to light. The light is like darkness, and darkness is like light. They're both exactly the same thing. There's no maila one over the other. There's no tfisas mokim b'chlal to any of the mailas that we know that exists in this world. Any of the mailas, the way it is mitzad, the definitions of any level of seder ishtalshalos. By the Eibishter himself, none of those definitions b'chlal exist. Kechashecha ke'oira. You can't even begin saying that light is a maila. So the avodah of a person over there is in ganzen not teifes mokim. In tzedakta geimer, v'rob she'echa geimer, like the Rebbe quoted before, whether you're righteous, whether the opposite, it's all one and the same thing. So mitzad this level, we say that over here, a person doesn't reach there. What does it mean when we say a person doesn't reach there? It's not shaykh b'chlal there. What a person does is not, it's a different reality b'chlal. Over there, none of this exists b'chlal. However, yesh inyan naila v'omek yaser. There's something that's higher and even deeper than this level of kichashecha kaira. And sometimes the term that's used in Chassidus to explain what this is, it's called pnimiyas makif. In other words, mitzad the level of makif, nothing's teifis makim. So the avodah of a person is not an accomplishment b'chlal, has no erech, has no value b'chlal. That's mitzad the level of makif. Mitzad pnimiyas makif, which is deeper even than makif, over there the avodah of a person is teifis makim. Okay, so what we're talking about over here is three different levels. There is the level where the avodah of a person is teifis makim. Why is the person's avodah teifis makim? Because he's teifis makim. That's the level where the person's mitzias is teifis makim, and therefore that's the realm where you can reach, and we have a shaykhis to the shayrish makir of who the person is. So it's the attack of the person's avodah. That's an accomplishment that has value mitzad the mitzias of who he is. That's the lowest level. That's Pashtus. When you begin discussing this subject, you would think a person can reach up until that level, which is the shayrish of who he is, and therefore what he does is effective. Then you have the second level, which is kachashecha kaira, a place where the whole mitzias of nevrayim, the whole mitzias of anything, has no value b'chlal. It's not teifis makim, makif. That's the union of makif. What's makif? If you could be makif something from atzilus to asiyah b'shaveh, or in the person's guf, let's say. You have the etzem hachayis of the person, which is makif, from his brain to his toenail, as one. So what does that mean? That if the toe and the brain are the same, lagabi, this etzem hachayis is the same, so the value of what the brain itself is, in contrast to what the toe is not teifis makim b'chlal. If it would be teifis makim, so then there's no comparison b'chlal to the brain, to the toe of a person. Elamai mitzad makif, it's all the same. There's no nafkamina. So therefore the same is benegate to the actions of a person. There's no maila to doing a mitzvah, not doing a mitzvah. None of it is teifis makim. That's the union of makif. But then you have pnimiyas makif. Mitzat pnimiyas makif, what a person does, befedish, does matter. Now why does it matter? It doesn't matter mitzat the fact that the person's hagabala is teifis makim here. So the Rebbe explains, what's the union of pnimiyas makif? Pnimiyas makif is an expression that's used in Chassidus, and this refers all the way to the essence of the Eibishter himself. Shasham, over there, the essence of the Eibishter himself, who chafetz b'maseim shel tzadikim dafka. The Eibishter desires the actions of tzadikim. Who desires it? Who's the one that said the mitzvahs? Mitzvahs come from a level. Mitzvahs come from a certain darga of giluyim, one level or another. The Eibishter himself. There's a famous lashon that the Rebbe Rashab says in the Torah Shalom, Nesichet, the Rebbe Rashab there says, Kol ha-mitzvahs misyachsim ala atzmos. Mitzvahs come from the essence of the Eibishter himself. Mitzvahs is not something that comes from one level or another level. The Eibishter himself gave the mitzvahs. He decided that the Yidden should do this mitzvahs, the Taryag mitzvahs. So when it comes to the essence of the Eibishter, Shom hu chofetz b'maseim shel tzadikim dafka. The Eibishter wants to say what the tzadikim do, the mitzvahs. And the Lashon of the Medrash says, V'nimlach b'nish maseim shel tzadikim. The Eibishter, so to speak, consults with the neshamas of tzaddikim when it comes to creating the world. U'kamei shekosov, and the pasuk says, V'oyev es Yaakov es Esav sanesi. The Eibishter says, I love Yaakov and I hate Esav. So this is the Eibishter's bechira. This lashon of the pasuk, V'oyev es Yaakov, is the Eibishter choosing Yaakov over Esav. V'shom u'inyan ha'bechiret yivcha lo nisnach l'seinu es go Yaakov es oyev selo. Here's the union of Bechira, where the Eibishter chooses is everlasting inheritance, the Yidden, the Goyin Yaakov, the might, the strength of Yidden, which the Eibishter loves forever. Shehu inyan Bechira chofshes betachlis. This is the concept of the Eibishter freely choosing betachlis. Bechira chofshes betachlis, without any influence whatsoever. She'inyan zeh, this union of Bechira chofshes by the Eibishter, hu b'makayim she'ein boi inyan shel giluyim klal. There's no expression, there's no revelation, there's no mitzias of anything. When there's a revelation, so then, mitzad that revelation, there's a netiyah, you're leaning in a certain direction. But by the Eibishter himself, which is bechira chavshes betachlis, there's absolutely no mitzias whatsoever. No, so what's this inyan that the Rebbe is speaking about? This is something that the Rebbe kocht sich in a lot. This inyan of Bechira. If you remember, we learned about this in the Purim Maimer, in Tavshin Yud Gimel, Maimer of Al Ken Kadal Yom Me'ela Purim. The Rebbe there talks a lot about this inyan of Bechira. So basically, to use the terms of that Maimer that we learned, so there the Rebbe says that you have something which is bli gvul, and even something that's bli gvul is still something that has some kind of a definition. It's bli gvul, but it can't come into gvul. Bli gvul says that gvul is nothing. Mitzad bli gvul is not an existence. Gvul is not teifes makom b'chlal. And then in the lashon of that Maimer, the Rebbe says there's bli geder, something that's totally undefined. When you have something that's completely undefined, so even bli gvul is not something that has to be defined to either. It's not defined by anything. The Eibishter himself, this is one of the whole Nekudas that we're learning about in the beginning of this Maimer. Even when you use the term Ein Sof, there's also two oifanim how to explain Ein Sof. Either Ein Sof just means unlimited, or the emes inyan of Ein Sof means that he's Taka Ein Sof. He has no description whatsoever, no definition whatsoever, not even the fact that he's bli gvul, nothing. So when you talk about a darga of a gilui, which is bli gvul, so that darga that's bli gvul, so over there, nothing is teifes makim. Mitzad the inyan of bli gvul, the mitzias of the world, which is mugbal, the actions of a person that he does in one way or another has no value whatsoever. What erech does the gvul and the mitzias of a person have? Legabe a gili of makif, which is bli gvul. That's only when you talk about bli gvul. But how about the Eibishter himself? Is the Eibishter himself defined by a gili of bli gvul? The Eibishter created this musig of bli gvul. The Eibishter decided that there should be a gilui and it should be bli gvul. The Eibishter is not defined himself by this inyan of bli gvul. No such a thing b'chlal. So Elamai, by the Eibishter himself, just like he could define himself, or so not define, the Eibishter could express himself through a ayah which is bli gvul, so too the Eibishter could decide to choose this mitzvah, to do this limited action, that he could decide that he wants this to be done. The gvul could be teifes makim for him. Why not? It's not be'emes teifes makim. It's not the word. Is not it's teifes makim. The Eibishter decided he wants it. There's a very big difference when you say that the avodah of a person is teifes makim mitzad the limitations of his mitzias. Mitzad the limitations of my mitzias. A mitzvah has a value. A mitzvah accomplishes something. You do a mitzvah. It's an oiftu. You took Gashmias, you brought it to a level of Ruchnias. Gashmias is darkness, Ruchnias is light, and so on. Mitzad the mitzias of a person, it's teifes makim, mitzad this mitzias. But this entire program of Gashmias and Ruchnias and an accomplishment of elevating Gashmias to Ruchnias, all of this, by the Eibishter himself, it's not the pshat that it intrinsically has value. This musig of transforming Gashmias into Ruchnias, this is something valuable to the Eibishter. Feidish not, it has absolutely no value to the Eibishter. Why is it something that is a mitzvah? Because the Eibishter decided it should be a mitzvah. Not because there's any nitiyah. When the Rebbe uses the lashon nitiyah, so what does nitiyah mean? Nitiyah means that there's a certain maila in this. There's a certain maila to a mitzvah. It has intrinsic value. When you do a mitzvah, there's an oif to it. There's an accomplishment that you're changing things, you're transforming, you're elevating, you're making gilui lakos, or whatever value there is. By the Eibishter, nothing has any value whatsoever. Because there is no mitzias, there is nothing that you could say that exists in the Eibishter's world. Whatever you know of, any maila that you know of, he created that very maila. So how could it have any tvisas makom by him? If he's not mochrich in it and he doesn't need it, it's not negeya to him. Elamai, muzmin zogin, that what's the shayrish of a mitzvah? The Eibishter decided to choose this without any, not because anything else influences on teifes makom. It's the Eibishter himself. And this is the bechira that the Eibishter chooses the Yidden as well. The bechira of the Yidden, bechira of a mitzvah, it comes completely from the Eibishter. So that's pnimiyas makif, which is higher than the makif where things are not teifes makom. Okay. We're in the Maimer Basi Lagani, Tafshin Chav Beis. We're middle of Se'iv Vav. We're holding on page Chav in this contrast. We stopped where it says Ukomuva Mibir Admur Mashab Shmaseiden Hanal. Right? Got it? Yeah. So we'll review Bekitza the point we learned there. The Rebbe says that the whole lineage we spoke about in the Maimer regarding Oirein Seif, you can also see how this is reflected in Avedas Adam. Or the Rebbe actually used the stronger lashon. The whole beard that we said before, when you get to Ein Sof, is mukhrach. You can see this point. We're compelled to say that this is true from the Indian the way it is in Avodas Adam. Okay, so what's the vart? So the Rebbe says, on one hand, the lashon of Chazal is, the Gemara says, that the greatness of the Ma'aseh Tzadikim is that they turn yesh into ayin. That's greater than Ma'aseh Shemayim V'Aretz, that the Eibusha creates ayin liyesh. On the other hand, this lashon itself should tell you that what the Eibusha does is actually greater, because when the Eibusha creates yesh ma'ayin, that's a koyach that comes from the very essence of the Eibusha himself. And the Ma'aseh Tzadikim, the Aveda that Yidden do in the world, to what level does it reach? It reaches to the level of ayin. The level of ayin is not the essence of the Eibusha himself. The essence of the Eibusha himself, there's a different term that's used. Yeshua Amiti. Ayin is a certain level of a gilui that's above, that's higher, that's soiviv, and therefore it's above our metzias. The whole metzias of the world is not teifas makkah, maybe. So this is the level of ayin that the Aveda of Tzadikim could reach, but not to the Eibusha himself. So what's the pshat in this inyan? So the Rebbe points out that there's an inyan of bchira. And bchira, sometimes in Chassidus, is called pnimiyas hamakif, and this is even greater than the inyan of ayin. That the emes is, it's taka true that mitzad the darga of makif, kechashecha ka'ira, so the darga of the Aveda of Yidden is not teifes mokim. The pasuk taka says, Rabu pashecha and tzim tzadakta v'Rabu pashecha matasaloi, that nothing a person does has any values whatsoever. It's not teifes mokim at all. But mitzad the bchira of the Eibishter. So the Eibishter is boiche in the lashon of the Maimah here. It's bchira chavshis betachlis, and there's no netiyah. There's no influence to this bchira. It's the Eibishter. He's being boiche. And mitzad the Eibishter, he's boiche that he wants the Aveda of Yidden, and the Eibishter is boiche the Yidden themselves. The Eibishter is boiche their Aveda. It comes completely from the Eibishter. That's the union of bchira. So as I explained yesterday, the point of Bechira is this expresses really something that's only by Atzmos, only by the Eibishter himself. When you come to any level of a Gilui, so it's already on a certain darga, it's already defined in a certain oifen. So it's one or the other. Either it's a Gilui that is mugbal to a certain level, to a certain world, to a certain oifen of Metzias in that world. Or even if you're going to say that it's bligvul and it's above the metzias of the particular level, but it's still defined. What is it defined? It's defined by the fact that it's bligvul, even soiviv kalalman, which is makav all the elemis b'shavah. And even more so, you say kechashecha ka'ira. That's also a certain defined metzias that the Eibishter creates, the idea of bligvul. Mashenkin, the Eibishter himself, if you come and say that the Eibishter is above everything, he's removed of everything, he's higher and higher, and therefore he has no shaykhs to anything. But if he decides, he could decide that he does want to have a shaykhs to something. Is he limited by the fact that he's unlimited, that he's higher than everything? If the Eibishter decides that he wants to dafka this, that he wants to have that this mitzvah should be done, and this yid is the Eibishter chooses him. Is the Eibishter limited? Of course not. Adarabah. The Eibishter has no gather whatsoever. The Eibishter is the true pshitas. So therefore, when the Eibishter chooses and says that he wants a mitzvah to be done, where is it coming from? It comes from the Eibishter himself. There's no influence whatsoever. No dagas, no giluyim, no inyanim. There's no accomplishment in the mitzvah. Mitzvah, its own value of what it is. It's because the Eibishter decided that this is what he wants. That's the concept of Bechira. Okay, that's the point we learned yesterday. But now the question comes, how does this connect to the theme of the Maimah here? How's this point to be? And after all, the question of the Rebbe was that in the Lashon of Chazal, it says that the Aveda of the Tzadikim reaches only to the level of Ayin. According to this Hezber, so what are we saying? That the Aveda of Tzadikim reaches to the essence of the Eibishter. Why? Not because the mitzias of a person has any value, but because the Eibishter chose it. So if he decides he wants this, so therefore it's connected to Atzmos. But in the lashon of the Gemara, what does it say? That the ma'is of tzadikim oisim miyesh ayin. What we do is we make from yesh ayin. That's l'chayra, a different inyan. So the pshat that the Rebbe is saying here to explain how our Aveda is connected and reaches atzmos doesn't explain the lashon of the Gemara that we make from yesh ayin. So let's see a little bit the hemshech over here. We'll try to explain it. Let's see inside where we're holding. Okay, move on. So this inyan that we're speaking about here, that the Aveda of Yidden is connected to the essence of the Eibishter himself. higher than any giloi, higher than any nitiya, higher than any influence that there is whatsoever. So kamuva mibir admur mashab nishmaseiden anal. So this concept is understood from the beer of the Rebbe Rashab that was quoted before. Shegam b'bchinis ha'ayir, also on the level of ayir, b'chinis ha'ayin, shesham agas avedis adam. So over here in the Lashon of Chazal, they don't use the term ayir, but they use the term ayin. This term ayin is similar to the concept of ayir. Just like ayir is it's an expression, it's a revelation. It's not the essence of the Eibishter himself. It's not the moir, it's not atzmos. The same thing also here, the Lashon of ayin refers to a level of ruchnius, which is ayin, a tremendous level of gilui, and therefore we refer to it as ayin, and that's where the avodah of a person reaches. So over here, what did the Rebbe Rashab say? Yeshnei inyan shuhu mein amoir. So you have over here this inyan of mein amoir, that what is this oir? This oir is completely a reflection of the moir. Whatever, so much so as you learned before, that not only the inyan of bli gvul, but also in tchila, whatever there is, whatever quality there is that you know that's by the Eibishter himself, you have this also in the oir. Shemisham nimshecha inyan the yivcha lanu es nachlaseinu as going Yaakov Gaimer, and from there, from the essence of the Eibishter, that's the shayrish of the bechira, that the Eibishter chooses the Yidden as his inheritance. So again, it's not what is the pshat and what the Rebbe is saying here? Why is the Rebbe bringing in this vart of the Rebbe Rashab of Oir Mein Amor? How is that relevant to the point that we're speaking about here? What is the Rebbe explaining? That the Avodah of a Yid reaches to the very essence of the Eibishter himself. Why? Because that's the Bechira. If the Eibishter said he wants this mitzvah, so when you fulfill the mitzvah, that's something that's connected to the Eibishter himself. There's no levels that's shaykh to this Bechlal. So why is the inyan of Oir Mein Amor Negeya here? How is this relevant to what we're speaking about? The Rebbe puts in over here that, so you could see in the Lashon here that the Rebbe is trying to connect this and explain the Lashon of the Gemara. The Gemara says that the avodah of a person reaches only to the level of ayin. We're explaining here that Chassidus tells us that the truth is that the avodah of a person does not only reach to the level of ayin. The avodah of a yid reaches to atzmus, to the essence of the Eibishter himself, mitzad the inyan of bchira. So how do we put the two together? Does the avodah of a yid reach only the level of ayin or even atzmus? The answer is, the Gemara Taka says that your avodah reaches to the level of ayin. However, this ayin is oir, and oir is me'ein amoir. So therefore, since the oir is a full reflection of what the moir itself is, the oir is not a metzias for itself. Oir is the revelation of the moir. So therefore, this that the Gemara says that a yid's avodah reaches to ayin means that it connects to the essence of the Eibishter himself. Because what is the ayin? Ayin is the moir. Ayin is the Eibishter himself, really. That's the taich of what the Rebbe is saying here. Ayin is the oir, right? And what's oir? What's oir? Oir is me'ein amoir. That's the taich of what the Rebbe is saying.
I mean, is there different levels in ayin also for each yesh?
There is. I'm not sure if you mean mamish in each yesh, could be, but there's definitely different dargis in ayin that Chassidus speaks about. Usually speaks about the ayin of yesha amiti, ayin of yesha nivra, but I'm not sure if that's relevant for the pshat of this maimer. Over here, the Rebbe speaks about ayin corresponding to the term oir. And mitzad inyan of oir, so oir is me'ein amoir. So therefore, from this we understand that the avodah of a yid connects to the essence of the Eibishter himself. Okay, now the thing is, could be that this point answers the stira. That on one hand, we say that the avodah of a person only reaches to the level of ayin. On the other hand, we say that it reaches to the essence of the Eibishter. So what's the teretz? The Rebbe Rashab said, oir mein amoir. So the oir is a reflection of the Eibishter himself. That's what it is. So therefore, it's not a contradiction. Okay, but soft, the question is, who needs this whole thing? What's the point of here of this? Why can't we just leave out the whole point of oir and leave out the lashon of Chazal ayin and just go straight to the point, which is that the Eibishter chose us, the Eibishter chose this mitzvah, and it comes directly from the Eibishter himself. So when I fulfill a mitzvah, I'm connecting to the Eibishter himself. Why do we have to have this point of oir or ayin in the lashon of Chazal in this whole subject? What would happen if we would leave that out? Leave it. That's the whole complexity of this maimer, if you think about it. If he would leave matter simple, which is that there's the essence of the Eibishter, atzmus and mahos, and there's a world, and he created us to fulfill what he wants, to do mitzvahs, and shine. Leave the whole oir out of the picture, then the whole maimer. So it's really not only a question over here, why the Rebbe brings oir over here, but ask on the entire maimer. What's this whole complexity of oir, mein amoir? And over here specifically, let's try to understand, how does it come in over here?
I mean, mata ein tachlis. That's mamish mitzvahs in the physical world. It's
No, I'm so mitzad atzmus, mitzad the essence of the Eibishter. The Eibishter is less hasar ponim minei. There's no place where the Eibishter is not there, and therefore, when the Eibishter wants, that's mitzad the presence of the Eibishter. But over here, we're talking about the bechira of the Eibishter. When the Eibishter wants something, so he wants this mitzias, and this mitzias is teifes mokim, not mitzad atzmo, but mitzad the Eibishter's bechira. This is what the Eibishter wants. So you have to have a inyan of oir over here. It's negeya. This inyan of oir is negeya here.
I mean, I don't understand. I mean, it seems like that's what we're talking about. The whole idea of or is a connection. That this is what's connecting.
So what's this? The
to
point
us.
of oir is connection. Very good, correct. So what's this? What's the hesba over there? What's this vart of the oir being connection? See, there's Rebbe.
How are we as Nivroim connected to the
Atzmos? Right. Okay, let me just finish the Indian inside.
Can I just ask you?
Yeah.
Make the shir for Shlema, Elka, Rachel, Bas, Aliza. She's having all kinds of surgery and April.
For Shalema B'meira. Amen. L'chein, so what does the Lashon Chazal say? Gedoyle Maisa Tzadikim Mi Maisa Shemayim V'aretz. That the greatness of the Aveda, of the actions of tzaddikim in this world is greater than the Maisa of Shemayim V'aretz that Eibush creates. Yashmayim. Kivin Shemagiyim B'b'chinas Ha'ayin, because Yidden through their Aveda reach to the level of Ayin. The Chazal say, but what is Ayin? Ayin Kefisha Nichlal B'yesha Amiti. We're talking about Ayin not as an entity for itself, where you see a Metzias of Ayin that's outside of the source. But the Ayin Kefisha Nichlal B'yesha Amiti, which is going, this is a different lashon, but it's the same point. Let's just, translate the words here. The ayin, which is included in the true existence, which is the Eibishter. Only the Eibishter is a true existence. So the ayin is not a yesha amiti. The Eibishter is a yesha amiti. But here we're talking about the ayin, which is nichlal b'yesha amiti. The whole point that we learned before, only the Eibishter is a yesha amiti. The Eibishter is a true existence. The ayin, which is a gili oyer, is already a different type of mitzias. It's a mitzias that's nischadish. It's a mitzias nimtza. It's a mitzias that the Eibishter created, an expression that comes out from the Eibishter, right? But you have the ayin that's nichlal b'yesha amiti. Va'ad, it goes even deeper than that. B'chinas ha'yechaylis, the expression of yechaylis that Chassidus explains. Shiyef sheklal lachalka miyesha amiti kanal. You can't at all separate it from the yesha amiti, from the Eibishter himself. What does yechaylis mean? It's his power. It's what he can do. It's not a gilui, it's even less than the concept of gilui. Even when you use the term ayin or gilui, oir, so sof, the union of a gilui is a metzias. It's something that's nisgala. But when you use the term yechayles is a deeper concept. Yechayles is his yechayles, what he potentially could do. So what's the yechayles? Yechayles is something else, it's a certain metzias, which is nichla, which is included. No, yechayles is his yechayles. When you say about a person, he has a yechayles. It's not someone else. Something else that's included in him. It's his Yechaylis. It's the Eibishter's Yechaylis. It's just the Eibishter himself. That's what Yechaylis is. Okay, but after all, even Yechaylis is... The Eibishter himself can't be defined in any way. He has Yechaylis for this, but the union of Yechaylis is that the Eibishter, which is Shleimus of everything, so he has this Yechaylis. So it's all the Eibishter himself. That's the Nekuda here. Okay, so the Nekuda of the union over here, what the Rabbi is saying, we're talking, on one hand, we're talking about the Ayin, talking about a Oir. On the other hand, we're talking about the Yesha Amiti. What's the Indian over here? What's the point of this whole thing? What the Rebbe is trying to explain is, which is really also the point of the entire Maimer, and they hear the Rebbe saying that this Indian is also mukhrech in the Indian of Aveda. That when you come to, let's take the Indian that we learned before, and then we'll apply it to the way the Rebbe explains it over here. So before the Rebbe explained, there's an Indian of Ein Seif. L'chayre, Ein Seif is only shaykh in the Eibishter's Metzias. Eibishter himself, which is Ein Leit Chila, so he could be Ein Seif as well. Anytime you have a dag which has a Tchila, or in the Lashon of the Alter Rebbe, it has a Ila V'Siba, has a certain cause to its being, it can't truly be Ein Seif. It's already a defined being. It was created in a certain matziv, so even if B'Payel it's going to be Nitzchi, but it's not the Emes Ein Seif. Ein Seif means that it has no definition whatsoever. So Ein Seif is only by the Eibishter himself. Came the Alter Rebbe and explained that because the Oyer is Mein Amoyer, so therefore this Inyan of Ein Seif, which is really only by the Eibishter himself, you have an Oyer as well. What's the Chiddush over here? The Chiddush is, Oyer is a Metzias Nimtza. Oyer is not an undefined Metzias. Oyer is already an expression. The whole concept of Oyer is the way the Eibishter is experienced and felt in the Metzias. The Eibishter himself is not experienced. The Eibishter himself is not Gilui. The Etzem of the Eibishter is not Shaykh B'chal to the Metzias of being felt or revelation. So the very fact that you say that there's a Oyer, what does Oyer mean? Oyer mean that this is Elokos, the way it comes out in the Eifen, that you could feel and sense what it is. So in other words, it's not in the Eibishter's reality. Oyer means outside of the source, so to speak, in another Metzias. So l'chayri you'll say that there's no shaykhis to these two things whatsoever. The Eibishter's Metzias is one sug Metzias, Oyer is a different sug Metzias, and there's no, where is there a connection between them? Came Chassidus and said that no, yes, it's taka true, Oyer is already a Metzias of Gilui, Oyer is a Metzias Nimtza, but in that Metzias Nimtza you have the inyan of Emes Ein Sof. You have the reflection, you have a revelation of real Ein Sof even in this Metzias Nimtza of the Oyer. That's the whole chiddush of Chassidus. With the husband that I explained already, because it's not a shefa. The Eibishter, the Giluyim from the Eibishter come out in a different oifen the way it is by a human being. Adarabah, because the Eibishter is an undefined being, so even the Giluy that comes out into a Metzias is really all the Eibishter. It's the Eibishter coming out in this place of Giluy. It's not anything other than the Eibishter himself. So just like that point is true, what the Alter Rebbe said, to the Giluy of the Eibishter in the world, the Rebbe is saying over here that the same thing is also true b'negei to Avodah. Because l'chayr over here you could ask the question, there's two different points here, and usually when Chassidus talks about this inyan of the Avodah of a person, and you ask the question, does the Avodah of a person really have value? Does the Avodah of a person mean something? Like Abid Eibishter? So what's the answer? There's one or two answers. If you want to talk about the inyan the way it is mitzad the mitzias of the person, so the answer is mitzad your mitzias, mitzad your limitations and the way you're defined in your being. So your avodah has a certain value up until a certain level where your avodah can be effective, where your avodah can reach. The shaydish of Nevrayim maybe. Usually it says that a person can come to that level which is shaydish on Nevrayim, or whatever the level a person can reach, but it has to be some tfisas makim, some erech to the avodah of the person, and therefore your avodah can reach there. Beyond that, on a level where the person's avodah has no value whatsoever, so there, if you're looking at it from the perspective of what your mitzias could do, so then it doesn't reach to that place. That's on one hand. On the other hand, from the Eibishter's perspective, mitzah the Eibishter's bechira, the Eibishter's bechira, the Eibishter chooses whatever he wants. So mitzad the Eibishter's bechira, which is the very essence of the Eibishter, this avodah matters to him. Because he decided it matters. Not because the value of the avodah itself is teifis makom. The Eibishter decided it matters. That's on the other end. So in other words, over here, we're not talking about this inyan mitzad the mitzias of the person. We're not asking a question, your mitzias is taka b'chlal not teifis makom. But the Eibishter decided that he wants it, so therefore it's teifis makom. Elamai, the only thing is, so this is usually the hesber. It's two different perspectives, two different inyanim here. So usually, mitzad the Eibishter's mitzias, mitzad the Eibishter's bechira, that is, in my world, within my mitzias, where I do have my agbalas, that mitzias of the Eibishter does not translate itself. It's not felt here, it's not experienced here. Mitzad the mitzias adam, what do I experience? I experience this mitzias of this world, with my limitations. And here, my avodah reaches, in my world, how do we experience Torah mitzvahs? We experience Torah mitzvahs with the value of, and the limitations also, of what our avodah has. We don't expect, that true mitzias nimtza, that's mitzad the Eibishter, what he decided. So mitzad him, it's the value of Torah mitzvahs is way beyond what we could fathom. But how does that doesn't shine, that doesn't come down, that doesn't get experienced in our mitzias? Comes the Rebbe here and is telling us, no, that because Oyer is Me'ein Amoir, so just like we're saying Menegei to the union of Oyer Me'ein Amoir, that the true Bligvul of the Eibishter himself does come down and is felt lamata mata on every single level, even in the lowest level. You can see true Ein Sof being revealed on every single level within Mitzias. So it is nirgash, that emes bligvul that there is lamaila is sensed and does come through on every single level below. It's the same thing with Torah mitzvahs. This bechira of the Eibishter, which is in the Eibishter's reality, in the Eibishter's mitzias, that's l'chayra totally above and beyond who we are, but nevertheless, here in our mitzias, in Welt, we could experience and sense this emes, this truth, this bechira of the Eibishter, we could sense it over here below, even in our mitzias. Why? Because this is the hesber of Oyer Me'ein Amoir. Because Oyer is Me'ein Amoir, so when we say that our avodah reaches to ayin, what is that ayin?
Even though that ayin on one hand, b'chetzaynius, it looks like it's a level which is shaykh to our mitzias. What's the emes though? What's this inyan of this ayin? This ayin is the oir of the Eibishter. And what's this oir? The oir is really the essence of the Eibishter. So therefore, the nekuda is that we're trying to explain how the b'chira of the Eibishter does come down over here into our mitzias, in this world, how we can feel it over here in our Aveda. That's the nekuda saying that the Rebbe speaks about here. Just to give you a similar thing that Rebbe. Correct. That's the whole chiddush over here. That this inyan is nirgash in our mitzias. There's a similar vart that the Rebbe says in a few places. The Rebbe speaks about this inyan of asarusa de la'ela and asarusa de l'sata. Right. So Chassidus says that there's always a rule that asarusa de l'sata could only reach a certain level of asarusa de la'ela that the nivra has the ability to be ma'ira. Then, Chassidus speaks about the fact that sometimes you have an asarusa de la'ela that comes b'derech matana. The Eibishter gives momayla beyond what a person can reach. L'mashal, this is explained b'negei to Sfiris ha'omer. That Sfiris ha'omer, every day there's an avodah that a person does, and then there's a hamshacha every day according to the avodah of the Sfiris ha'omer on that day. It's only be'erech to the nivra what he could accomplish. Then you come to Matan Torah, that's Yom HaChamishim. That's a gila that comes momayla beyond the mitzias of a person. Alter Rebbe look at the Torah, and in different places this is always spoken about. So the Rebbe said, and look at the Sichos, and more than once you have this in the Rebbe's Torah, that if you want to talk about Asarusa de l'Sata, and the emphasis is on the word Sata, which means you're a mitzias of a Tachten, in the experience and in the reality of the Tachten. Here, in this mitzias, in this type of mitzias that exists in this world, there's limitations. You can only reach to a level that has a shaykhis to you. The Sata and the Sarusa de l'Sata, Sarusa de l'Ela, Ela and Sata are above and below of two levels that have some erech between them. So that's what you could reach. What's if you talk about the Sarusa de l'Ela mitzadatzma, totally removed to you? It's not shaykh to the mitzias of the Sata. It's not shaykh to the mitzias of the Tachten. But this is all if you talk about mitzias of a person as a Sata, as a Tacht, as a mitzias for himself. So then he has limitations how far he can reach. How about if you're talking about the essence of the Yid, which is connected to the essence of the Eibishter? So mitzad that is not a mitzias of a Sata. I'm not below. Adarabah, the Yid is connected to the essence of the Eibishter. Mitzad that, your Aveda is connected to the very essence of the Eibishter. You can reach higher than any level. There's no limitations whatsoever. That's usually the hashvud that the Rebbe says. Because over here, you and the Eibishter are not two separate entities. If it's you, and then there's the Eibishter, so the moment you say there's two entities, there's a Hagbala here. But not if you're talking about that essence of the Yid, which is one with the Eibishter. Okay, but over here, in this Maimon, the Rebbe is saying a step further. Even in the mitzias of you being a Sata, even this over here, your mitzias of being a Tachten, so you have your own reality of mitzias, which is so different, completely different than the Eibishter's undefined existence. That undefined existence penetrates and shines and comes down and could be experienced in your mitzias of a Tachten, who you are over here below. And this is what Chazal was saying when they said that the avodah of a person only reaches to the level of ayin. And so l'chayra ayin refers to our mitzias, our definition of mitzias, but nevertheless, in that ayin, it's me'ein, amoir, and you have the reality of the Eibishter, the bechira of the Eibishter himself that's here in this ayin. Okay, that's the chiddush of this inyan over here. Okay, from here the Rebbe goes and explains this inyan v'negei to Shabbos, a very, very powerful inyan. V'negei to Shabbos, the way the Shabbos is explained in this Maimer is like nowhere else. Okay, the Vart of the Baal Shem Tov, we'll see him at Shem tomorrow.